All right, we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Suzanne Macdonald, and I'm the Chief Community Development Officer at the Island Institute. I want to thank everybody for joining us here today, and especially to our excellent panelists and James and the summit organizers and all of the sponsors, especially the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, for having us here today. What a wonderful event. I hope folks have had a chance to join into some of the conversations earlier this week. We just learned that this is actually the final of the broadcasts for the Virtual Island Summit. So I hope that you all enjoy this today. To get us started, James has a couple of polls for us to complete to help us see who else is on the line. So he's going to put a couple of questions up, and if we could ask you to answer these questions briefly, we'll take a look. So the first question is for you to select, where do you consider home? So if you fill that out, we'll take a look. Hello to everybody in the chat. It's great to see the diversity of places showing up. So happy it stopped raining in Scotland. I'm actually in Reykjavik here today as part of the Arctic Circle Assembly, and it's been sunny as well. So the answer, I think, should be popping up, James. So we've got a lot of folks from North America. You should be able to see this on your screen, but if you're on by phone, we'll let you know we have about 58% of the audience calls North America home, followed by 25% in the Caribbean. We have smaller groups of folks under the Pacific, Europe, and other. So thanks for that. Let's go on to the next poll, which is which sector best describes you? We'll take a look at the answers from that. Great. All right, let's take a look at the answers there. We've got a great mix. It looks like just over a third from the private sector. We've got folks in the academia, public sector, utilities, NGOs. It's a great mix. So this is really exciting. I'm glad we can all be here today. So thanks. Back to networks. I'd like to start off with a story. We'll go to the next slide. So this past spring, I had the opportunity to speak with Karen Amsbacher. Karen is a longtime friend of the Island Institute where I work. She's also the executive director of the Core Sound Waterfowl Museum and Heritage Center on Harkers Island, a tiny community of about 1,200 people just off the coast of North Carolina. In September 2018, Hurricane Florence hit Harkers hard, and Karen and her community have been working to rebuild ever since. When we spoke on the phone earlier this year, I was really eager to hear what Karen thought the coast of Maine, where I live, could learn from her community's recovery efforts, as we're always thinking about how we can better prepare our coast for increasingly frequent disruptions to our environment and economy. Her answer has really stuck with me. You see, as a community leader, Karen told me she had learned all the nuts and bolts about navigating insurance claims and FEMA processes, about fundraising and building repair. But she told me that she thought that recovery and resilience really come down to a community's connections. She pointed back to the coast of Maine, which she has come to know over the years, and reminded me that we are fortunate to have island communities that have been working for decades to connect with each other and the mainland resources that are helping them to thrive. She told me, you have a way to communicate, to organize, and to respond. That's what gives you a heads up on whatever comes your way. So when we talk about disaster recovery and planning for resilience, this story reminds me that we need to focus not just on our physical infrastructure, but also on our civic infrastructure, or the human ties that connect us. Networks are an important way to build those connections, and they are the focus of our discussion today. Next slide. So just a little bit more about the Island Institute before we continue. The Island Institute is a 36-year-old community development organization based on the coast of Maine. For those of you who don't know, Maine is tucked up in the northeast corner of the US, just to the south of Canada. Our coastline is actually one of the longest in the United States, and it's home to thousands of little islands. About 100 years ago, more than 300 of those islands have year-round communities, but now only 15 of those communities remain, with populations that have dwindled down to about 1,200 at the largest, and down to about 50 or even less for our smallest communities. These communities face many of the same challenges that islands do globally. Next slide. At the Island Institute, we collaborate with community leaders in Maine to build a networked coast, one in which island communities are connected to each other, to the mainland, and to islands beyond our coast as a strategy to overcome the challenges of being small and isolated. Next slide. We all know that through networks, people can achieve more together than they can alone. At the Island Institute, we believe that the concept of networks is one that's actually pretty inherent to what island communities are all about. It might not be apparent on LinkedIn, but I actually think that islands are some of the best networked places on the planet. Out of necessity, you all know that islanders have built quite the skill set at working together, at sharing information and resources, and even working across sectors and across difference to solve problems, to get things done, all out of a deep commitment to place and to its future. We've experienced firsthand the power of creating networks between islands. Networks have helped communities to connect to solutions that have been developed in other places, to create a cohort where leaders have often felt peerless, and to build trust through shared experiences and commitment to place. Formalizing the connections between places allows us to share information even more efficiently and to accelerate the pace of problem solving when time and other resources are so often limited as they are on islands. So to maximize the impact of networks, we know we need to bring intentionality to this work. There is a craft to doing it. At the Island Institute, we've learned the importance of thoughtful network design, ensuring that you have the right role or right design for the right goal. We encourage our partners to be upfront in their goals or with their table stakes so that we can easily identify and prioritize the areas of overlapping or shared interests that allow us to move network work from the corners of our desk, where networks so often sit, to the center of our desks, where we can collaborate to make progress. We are increasingly trying to be reflective in how we build partnerships, encouraging the groups that we work with to think about new and sometimes surprising partners in order to meet our network's goals. And I would just say we've been really fortunate to have had a lot of help in developing our approach to network building, or as some call it, network weaving. I'd encourage you to check out the resources to the right if you're interested to learn more, or use the chat box to share the resources that you found helpful in your network work. Next slide. We've learned so much from our partners over the years in the experience of designing and participating in networks. These are just some of the examples of the statewide, regional, national, and international network initiatives that have shaped and inspired the work of the Island Institute over the years. Next slide. So I hope that today you can learn from the exciting network examples that we're about to share. I feel lucky and honored to be joined today by some amazing colleagues that span across 11 different time zones, each with their own story of how networks are helping to increase the resilience of their island communities. I encourage you to check out the Summit website to reach each of the speakers' bios and to learn more about their work. We'll be holding time for the discussion at the end, but if you have questions in the meantime, please feel free to keep using the chat box. We'll answer them as best we can as we go along, and then we'll have time at the end to go through them as well. So we're going to kick things off by staying in Maine with Roger Berle, the founder and co-chair of the Maine Islands Coalition. So over to you, Roger.
Here in Maine, there's my island right there, Cliff Island. I've been in my family since 1905, been in my heart since 1905. I've lived here for over 50 years, year-round or so, on Cliff Island. So my connection with the Maine Islands Coalition, as Suzanne said, goes back about 16, 17 years. The Maine Islands Coalition, or MIC, was formed in the early 2000s when a number of the year-round Maine coast islands felt insecure or worse as individual communities dealing with a series of external threats. In Casco Bay at the time, Liquid natural gas, or LNG, loomed as a major and very frightening concern. In the middle of the chaotic activity and desperate fundraising to counteract the LNG proposals, Eldon Mayer on Chebeaga Island and I put our heads together to jointly ask the Island Institute for assistance. The hastily prepared request was for the Institute to put out a call to all 15 year-round islands to come to Rockland to talk about responding together to not only LNG, but also to other challenging issues. When Philip Conkling and Peter Ralston had founded the Island Institute in 1983, the general goal was for the Maine islands to move from being separate islands unto themselves and to rather grow into much more of an archipelago. Well, 20 years later, the Institute found itself having helped the islands develop themselves economically, scientifically, culturally, and in many other ways through the means of hiring on staffing with expertise in the many fields pertinent to these unique communities' needs. But what was left behind during all this providing of very sophisticated support was to get back to the simple inter-island communication initially envisioned in 1983. So the Institute responded to the request around 2003 to convene a meeting to share, discuss, and address current concerns up and down the coast of Maine. The result was the Institute directing a staff member, Nate Michaud, to invite representatives elected or appointed from within their communities to meet on a regular basis. The resulting Maine Islands Coalition became a formal structure with a regular schedule of 4 meetings spread around the year. Each meeting would have a keynote topic and involve inviting knowledgeable panelists from both within and without these island communities to pinpoint problems and solutions to any issue being experienced on one or more of those islands. The result of this 17-year commitment has been 4 quarterly meetings per year, including Maine Islands Coalition housekeeping, Island Institute staff updates and reports, legislative updates from attending legislators, and island check-ins, and then, of course, the panel presentations, Q&A, and interactive discussions on that meeting's keynote topic. All the attendees over all these years have enjoyed and learned from every one of these meetings. There has been a consistent level of enthusiasm and energy. The island check-ins part is always cited as everyone's favorite piece of each meeting, and the informal noise level around that part is hearteningly loud. The topics chosen in advance may apply to one island community or to several of them simultaneously. Solutions and suggestions often come from another island or islands which have been successful in addressing a particular matter at hand. One meeting per year is held at the State House in our capital city of Augusta, so that our 13 state legislators will have an easier time attending the meeting, listening to our issues, and reporting on legislative activity which could affect Maine's island communities. I'm going to read the laundry list of topics. I bet most of them are very familiar to all of you, particularly maybe in the American segment. Here we go. Property taxes, oppressive and disruptive to year-round residents. Land conservation and how taxes are affected by that, property taxes. Economic development, microloans, insurance, transportation, ferry and air service. Sea level rise, oh my gosh. Broadband, leadership succession, volunteering, recruitment and management of volunteers, legislative relations, wind power, ocean energy, healthcare, elder care, affordable and workforce housing, elderly aging in place, substance abuse, opioids, mental health, emergency services, public assistance, tick-borne diseases, wow, lobstering, lobster zones and licensing, aquaculture, ground fishing, fuel shortages, weatherization, energy efficiency, fire and rescue, including training, schools and their sustainability, population, maintenance, and rebuilding, a big one. We're down from 300 to 15 year-round islands, as Suzanne said. Historical societies and museums, solid waste management and removal, junk cars as part of that, recycling, stores, post offices, summer community interaction on year-round islands, Airbnbs. As needed or as appropriate, some of these topics are repeated. For instance, tourism came up again this year as a contrast between very large Peaks Island near the city of Portland, which reported being under siege in so many ways, and Little Isle of Ho down east, which could have used more tourists to support its store and gift shop. An MIC annual report is published after each year's series of meetings recounting the keynote topics and the results of these discussions. These reports are distributed within each island community by the Maine Island Coalition representatives, who are also charged with soliciting suggestions of concerns from within the community needing to be addressed. The year-round Maine coast islands comprise around 5,000 residents and 500 school pupils. Vinyl Haven has the largest population of about 12 to 1,500, while Matinicus is the smaller at 15 to 25 residents. Geographically, these islands range about 125 miles from the southwest end, Peaks Island, to the northeast end, Frenchboro, Long Island. In the summer months, populations can increase as much as 5-fold. A coincidental model network, the TLC, the Teaching and Learning Collaborative, was established during the same time period when the Island Institute created an electronically connected virtual school community among the 6 smallest islands: Frenchboro, Matinicus, Isle of Ho, the Cranberries, Monhegan, and Cliff. In a given year, some of these schools may have 5 or fewer pupils, including none. But in the aggregate of the TLC, this so-called student body may average around 40 pupils, which is great. On a regular basis, these group school children have book groups and other shared learning experiences. Mostly, however, it is a means for these young children to not feel so isolated or so alone in the world, both educationally and socially. 40 years ago, there was little knowledge of local issues being shared between islands that were anywhere from 1 mile to 100 miles apart. Each community felt as if they alone had problems unique to themselves and had to reinvent the wheel on their own. While, yes, availing itself of some Island Institute staff and resources, the Maine Islands Coalition has met this knowledge shortfall through creating a network of connectivity through face-to-face, in one place, regular meetings. The results have been invaluable for the sustainability of these 15 islands individually and as a whole. I will tell a couple of brief stories. One is about sustainability of schools on one of our 15 islands, Great Cranberry. The last family with school-aged children left the island years ago, but the island of Great Cranberry saw to it that the school building would be kept open, heated, electrified. A teacher would be paid ongoing, a principal, and a share of the superintendent, in the hopes that one day a family, a young working family with school-aged children would come back. Well, guess what? A few years ago, that dream happened, and now Great Cranberry, I think, has 12 kids in its school. The other story is about post offices. There are 3 legs of the year-round community, and that is the store, the school, and the post office. Well, again, 15 years or so ago, Matinicus Island and Cliff Island were proposed for severe service reduction, no personal service. Wait a minute. It's not like out here on these islands, it is not like on the mainland in Greater Portland, where you can drive another 5 or 10 minutes and get to another post office. No. We have only one and a lot of water in between us and the next post office and a lot of time to cross it. So in the process of trying to save our post office, I was very involved along with a lot of other people in the Cliff Island community, and I happened to have a relationship with our 2 senators, Senators Snow and Collins. I would happen to be at fundraisers or other events where these 2 senators, one or the other, both Republicans, would be there. And they would see me walking across the floor towards them, and they would say, "Wait, Roger, we know your post office. We're going to save it for you. We're going to save it for you." And guess what? They did. So, a couple of stories. That's it.
That's excellent. Thank you, Roger. That's great. Roger's leadership has meant so much to the coast of Maine and the members of the Maine Islands Coalition. We've shared that story. It really is the foundation of so much of what happens for us at the Island Institute. You always start with the Maine Islands Coalition, and so much good work has come out of there. I know I had the chance to speak to the Highlands and Islands Enterprises Conference earlier this year. We told a story about the Maine Islands Coalition and this political power that it has wielded. And that's what it looks like on the day-to-day is at least they're running to you, Roger, and not away from you. So that's great. For folks who are interested more about Maine Islands Coalition, we do have a website, a page on the Island Institute's website. If you search Maine Islands Coalition, or we might actually just put that in the chat box, you can see all of the minutes from the previous meeting, so you can see what was discussed. And a lot of what Roger talked about, the solutions that the group has come up with and implemented, are captured in the Island Institute's What Works Solutions library. So I'd encourage you to check out those stories as well. And we're always looking for ideas and stories to share on that part of our website as well. So we're seeing that your work is really resonating with a lot of people, Roger. So you know, we'd love to keep in touch on these issues. And it's just wonderful to look through the attendee list. We've got so many Maine Islands represented. I see Islesford and Islesboro, Shabig, friends from the Vineyard and Block Island. It's wonderful to have you all. So that was our way to sort of start with Maine. And I want to talk about broadening our horizons. And that's really been through our collaborations in Europe. And Alexis is here today representing the Samsung Energy Academy, and I know has been deeply, deeply involved in the island networks in the EU. So I want to pass it over to him to talk through the European perspective of network building for islands.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I'm very happy to participate in this session. From my side, I would like to add to the discussion a few elements on networks and what impact can they have on territories on the ground, and in particular on islands. We're of course talking about resilience and climate change, and another challenge that territories often face has to do with access to energy and security of supply. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the global answer to these challenges, the answer of the global community so far has been the Paris Climate Change Agreement and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are meant to create a global framework for local climate action. Next, please. For the implementation of this global framework, though, the governments is top-down, with intermediate actors that play an important role, such as the federal level in the US or the EU in Europe, and then the national level member states or the state level, and then even lower and lower. But often the message does not always get, or it's not always understood on the ground, where often there is not enough capacity to understand, prioritize, and deliver local climate action, for instance. So it's not very obvious always how the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, can be translated for what interests a community, for example, and people on the ground. And this is a point where a network can be helpful, in my opinion, and I would like to briefly explain why and how. First of all, the way I see it is that in a network, the members are other people or organizations have similar profiles, viewpoints, statutes, if it's an organization, and scope of work. And as a result, this creates a familiarity. People are familiar with each other's point of view and position on the climate action process, for example. I'm giving this as an example, and have the same goals. It is very often we walk into a meeting in a room and we try to find immediately someone we know, someone we're familiar with, and someone who can understand very easily what we say. So this is the kind of message I'm gonna. An example where people gather and have a commons with equal access and opportunities is the campfire. So members can be different, members of a network can be different, often of different cultures, but they have always a key issue which is in common. And this is the defining element of the network. My experience comes from a network of islands in Europe and in particular in Greece. Originally, I'm from Greece. This is a network of approximately 40 islands, each of which is a local authority, a municipality in particular, with a mayor, services, and a vision for climate action. In such a national network, there is a common legislative framework in a series of policy areas and very similar challenges also for every island, despite the differences in sizes, such as climate change, accessibility, dealing with the peaks in energy, water, and waste during the tourist season, etc. A second example I would like to bring is is kind of different from a network of islands at European level I've been working with. All these islands that you can see in red circles are European territories, and there are also local and regional authorities as before. In this case, there is a common EU framework in terms of policy. So I'm trying to show you that to define what is a common characteristic every time. Many challenges and concerns are different depending on the geographical area, country, culture, etc. But still it makes sense. It made sense for all these islands to gather in a network and cooperate with each other, which is impressive. From the cooperation in a network, there are significant benefits for the members. The most important element, in my opinion, is that members can identify and relate to each other very quickly and very easily. They understand easily each other's concerns, fears, because they have similar experiences. They speak the same language, even if the actual language they speak is different. So a network is a brilliant way to bring, to share knowledge and best practices about common concerns. And together, the members of a network can increase in size, have a greater voice to promote their views and approaches to solve problems and achieve their goals. It therefore comes as no surprise that very often advocacy efforts are done through cooperative efforts and networks. Another very important element is that a network increases the visibility of its members, and having eyes looking to a local community from the outside make a network's members more important and increase the motivation for cooperation in projects for common interest, for example. Next slide, please. So a few words about the lessons learned from my experience working with or within networks for the last 10 years. I have seen very small communities that believed they were completely alone, to discover that they have allies in the completely opposite side of the globe, and the connection made them less introverts. It is also impressive that for communities to feel closer to each other, distance is not important. A network can create a feeling of belonging, which is reassuring and motivating, independently of how far one member is from the other. And all in all, in a network, and such cooperation creates a great value for its members. Next slide, please. And can become, next please. Next slide, please. Andy?
Uh-oh. I'm here.
Yep.
That's what I got.
There's one more. Anyway, the last one is just a picture, which is, I think, it's representative. So I was saying that in a network, and such cooperation creates great value for its members. And the picture that we cannot see is people around the lake holding hands. So it's a bit of a symbolism for becoming a framework for co-creation and ownership of the processes and of the results. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to discuss further or answer any questions.
Thanks, Alexis. We actually could see the photo, or at least I
Okay,
could.
sorry.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's great. I love it. I love it. That's great. Alexis, I know had a big week this week. Many of you know the story of Samsø Island in Denmark and the Samsø Energy Academy, where Alexis is helping to build global partnerships, and their founder, Søren Hermansen, was awarded an award in Brussels just the other day. So congrats to our partners there. So thanks, Alexis, for bringing us that depth of network building on such a broad scale. It's something that I think in New England, or at least in Maine, we really aspire to try to do as well. And wonderful to see that there's support from so many countries and from the EU itself to get all of that done. So thank you so much. We're gonna go next to my colleague Stephanie in Alaska. And we're going to talk about the role of networks building resiliency, not just in islands, but in small remote villages that in many ways are like islands. We realize here on the coast of Maine and in this discussion about Arctic countries that we actually all have a fair amount in common with the remote villages in the interior of Alaska, in addition to their islands. So Stephanie has been a great colleague for 5 years now, where we've been trying to, with the support of the National Renewable Energy Lab and the Department of Energy, build out those linkages between the New England islands and the islands and islanded communities of Alaska. So Stephanie, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. And thank you, Alexis. I really appreciate what you said about islands not feeling alone. I think that's a huge part of this, is knowing other people are facing the same challenges and trying to solve them and sharing that information. And it's a great lead into what I'm going to talk about. I'll come back to who some of these people are at the end, but go ahead and next slide. So just my background, I have my own energy consulting firm here in Alaska, but what I'm going to talk about today is mostly work that I've done with a group that's also here in Alaska, Renewable Energy Alaska Project. It's been around for 15 years, and the executive director, Chris Rose, put it together. It's a network of a very diverse coalition of folks, utilities, Alaska Native corporations, community leaders, political leaders that have an interest in energy in Alaska. And we're focused on energy. I appreciated Roger's slides. There's so many issues, but energy is at a base level for resilience for a lot of communities. If you can have an affordable cost of energy, a sustainable cost of energy, then you have resources to tackle so many more of those other issues. So that's the reason we focus on it. REAP's mission is to facilitate the increased development of renewable energy in Alaska, and they do that in a lot of different ways. So I'm only going to talk about two today, the Alaska Wind Working Group and the Islanded Grid Resource Center, but just wanted to put those others on there, that they're working through education with a network that works through K through 12 education on energy, to get people all the way through to learn about energy and have a career, and also on the policy and financing angle. So the Renewable Energy Grant Fund was a fund that Chris helped get the state to pass that provided up to $50 million a year to help communities do projects. So where am I? The lower map is where Alaska is at. Contrary to most maps that you see in Alaska, we're not next to California and Hawaii. They usually try to scrunch us in there. We're a little further to the north, a little colder. And even though we're not an island, and we're huge, if you lay us over the United States, you can see how big Alaska is. We're very much an island when it comes to energy. We're not connected to any other grids. And in a lot of cases, our communities are not even connected by a road system. So they're on their own individual grid. We have 200 plus communities that are not connected to a road system and are very much like their own islands. So next slide, just a picture here of the Alaska Wind Working Group. These are some of the installed wind projects. And the Alaska Wind Working Group was started in 2005. REAP has been facilitating the group with support from National Renewable Energy Laboratory and the state's Energy Authority. And basically the reason we did it was to bring people together in the communities to connect them, and also connect them with researchers, people who work in the supply chain, other community representatives that were trying to get these energy systems started. So when we started the group, there was only a few systems in Alaska, and now there's over 30 communities. And just very much like the other island communities that are here, we're motivated by the same things. We have very high costs of energy, up to 90 cents a kilowatt hour, up to $10 a gallon for fuel. And these are the people you can see in the pictures, they're trying to survive there and make a community out of it. So the group is focused on trying to solve that. Oh, go ahead and next slide. The energy challenges. So we face some unique challenges in Alaska. It's a lot like islands. We have limited human and financial capacity. We have very high transportation costs for installing energy systems. And I don't know if anybody else has muskox, but we have muskox. And if they're out there, you don't want to mess with these guys. You just stay away from your system till they've moved on. So we have these, go ahead and next slide. So we share a lot of the same challenges, and we share the limited resources. The communities on their own don't have the technical know-how or the human capacity to get them going. So go ahead and next slide. What the Alaska Wind Working Group did was bring people together, much like Alexis is talking about there. We organized meetings where people came together. We have hands-on training events. We do site tours. The one in the middle is actually a roadside system we have here in Alaska in Delta Junction, and there's a couple of different turbines there. People are able to kind of lay their hands on things and get a picture in their head of what they might want in their community. So we use those convenings to highlight best practices, success stories, and identify priorities for further research and technology. So as our systems have advanced in Alaska, people have been interested in new types of technology and needs. And so we bring those people back, and we're looking at how to optimize our systems here in Alaska to be even more efficient and be able to save more money for folks. We also produce publications like Renewable Energy Atlas, which will show you where development is in Alaska, and a Community Wind Toolkit, which is kind of a guide to resources for communities. So go ahead and next slide. At the same time we're bringing people together, we're also reaching out to business leaders, because we're trying to make our communities more resilient, but we know what we're doing here is very much a business opportunity around the world. There's technology being developed and expertise that we're all developing in our island communities that are exportable around the world. So one of our jobs is to make that case to the business leaders that are sometimes outside of the communities, to make them see the business opportunity in investing in these remote communities. Go ahead and next slide. So in 2015, we expanded from the Alaska Wind Working Group to the Islanded Grid Resource Center. And we partnered with the Island Institute in Maine with Suzanne, and now with the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute in Hawaii with Mark, to basically expand what we're doing. So it's much of the same effort, just on a bigger scale and with 10 time zones. And we've had an initial couple years of work. We're looking to expand that network. And if anybody is interested in that, I've already seen some great comments in the chat room. It's really encouraging to see all the groups that are working out there. And we would love to connect with you beyond this event here. So go ahead and next slide. And I want to come back to something Alexis said about how you can have a network, but sometimes on the ground, it doesn't get always translated. And so just one of the lessons that I think we've learned that's so important is the power of one local champion. So this is Matt Bergen, and he lives in Kotzebue. He runs the utility there. It's a town of about 3,000 above the Arctic Circle, so it's pretty cold year-round, beautiful place. And he isn't a public speaker. He doesn't like public speaking, but he's learned how to run the system in Kotzebue, and they have had a lot of challenges. But when you have somebody like Matt that's willing to kind of work through those, and there's a couple other people in town too, you're able to solve those, because they will reach out and you can help them, but they're day after day. So having that local champion is so valuable. So one thing we do besides holding the convenings and helping with funding and connecting folks is encouraging people like Matt to to publicly speak and become connected. And he's still not comfortable with it, but he's a great resource. And we know there's no substitute for having somebody like Matt, who's in his position, talking to other people in the same positions. So utility operator. So go ahead and next slide. I'm going to go through these quicks, but I just wanted to give a couple slides that Matt has had that shows what he brings to the table. So he brings that utility perspective. Go ahead and next slide. He is not one to sugarcoat things. He's great because he will talk about the challenges. So this is just how long it has taken them to get where they are. And they've got an amazing system there now with wind, and they're actually adding solar on, and they've got a battery. Go ahead and next slide. And he's thinking about it from the user perspective. So that's what he brings to it. He also has kind of a sense of humor, which is what that zombie apocalypse insurance is about. Having to think about why you would even want wind. Go ahead and next slide. And thinks about things that you don't expect to have happen. So they have a plant that was originally set up for diesel. It had tons of heat. They just wanted to expel that heat. When they started having wind and running their diesels less, all of a sudden they had a problem with keeping their power plant warm. So, you know, just great insights and super helpful. Go ahead, next slide. I just wanted to mention Kodiak, Alaska. That's a shining example in Alaska. They've been renewably powered since 2014 at least, and they've had a real vision and planning, and they've actually been able to lower their energy costs. And the person in that picture is Darren Scott. He's the CEO, and he's another person with just amazing resources and being a champion and guiding that through all the hurdles that they encountered there. So go ahead and next slide. Just an example from our partners in Maine. So they're facing a different issue with offshore wind and communities there. I'm not as familiar with, but people online are, with you're feeling the impact firsthand, and how do you negotiate with the wind companies as they want to put turbines in your view shed that affect your life and, you know, potentially are an energy source. So the Island Institute organized an exchange trip to get people more educated about what they were facing, and also worked with folks on how they can be part of the process so communities have a say. And that report is a very good resource for how you can help to engage communities. So they produce that as well. Go ahead and next slide. So as far as goals, just an example of some of the things that, you know, this is where we're trying to get to. We're trying to help these communities, help our islands be a livable place, because we love to live there. And how do we keep them there and not lose the post office and the school? It's so interesting, these conferences, because even though our climates are a little bit different in some cases, we share so much in common. So go ahead and next slide. And I just wanted to come back to this again, because I think this is what this event is about, is connecting us. And I could tell you a story about each of the people in this picture. And they've had a huge impact in developing energy in Alaska, and a huge wealth of resources. And if we can connect some of our technology and wealth of knowledge here with people in other places, these are issues we can solve. So it's really exciting to be part of this. And just thanks again to James and Suzanne for organizing it, everybody for being online. And you can next slide, it has my contact information.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Wow, that was great. It was fun to see so many familiar faces, and we do have some of those folks from the offshore wind photo online. I saw their names. I'm here in Reykjavik. I heard Clay Copland from Cordova talk today about his project in Alaska, and the Kodiak example was a shining example here as well. So there's so much to learn from the investments in Alaska. And like Stephanie said, all of this is rooted in community. It's rooted in place. If we were just talking about technology and steel in the ground, we wouldn't be able to make the progress that we've seen made in Alaska. And we're lucky here on the East Coast to be able to partner and learn from Stephanie and her colleagues there. So thanks to everybody online who's contributed to that story. I want to move on now and kind of zoom out a little bit from the energy focus and move over to the Great Lakes, where people, I think, similar to Maine, I think are always somewhat surprised to realize how many island communities are in the Great Lakes between the two countries. And like they're sometimes surprised to hear there are islands off the coast of Maine. So we've been fortunate at the Island Institute to have a partnership with the now Great Lakes Alliance, started about 4 or 5 years ago, and we're really thrilled with the progress that's been made with that initiative, and so excited to be working with these folks as they further develop this initiative. So I think you'll find it really fascinating. I'll welcome Matt and Michael. Thanks.
Thanks, Suzanne. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, I guess wherever you are. Yeah, this is exciting to hear all these different regions. Just for a bit of geography to start off with, the North American Great Lakes is where we're located. Now, this is a series of 5 freshwater lakes in the mid or eastern central portion of North America. They run along the border of Canada and the United States. These are often referred to as inland seas, very immense lakes. 5 of the largest 15 lakes on the planet are included here. Lake Superior, the farthest to the north, is the largest freshwater lake by surface area. Overall, they constitute 20% of the world's surface freshwater. And just for the hydrologists in the group, they are interconnected and they drain generally from west to east, heading out the St. Lawrence River out to the North Atlantic. So the photo on the slide is a satellite photo that shows the lakes and the 14 communities, the island communities that currently participate in the Great Lakes Islands Alliance, or GLIA as we call it. 12 of those are in the US and 2 are in Canada. The international border runs roughly down the middle of the 4 eastern lakes. There's also, I wanted to point out, a large number of native peoples, indigenous peoples that maintain sovereign rights to many of the islands. So to give you a quick sense of scale, our smallest island community is about 1.2 square miles, which is about 3.1 square kilometers. The largest is Manitoulin Island, which is the far one, the closest one to the North American inset. That's 1,100 square miles or 2,800 square kilometers. That's the largest freshwater island in the world. In terms of the distance to the mainland, also highly variable. A few of our islands have a ferry trip of only 5 minutes. The longest is 2 hours. And then just in terms of the overall scale, the distance between the far end bookend islands is about 500 miles or 900 kilometers. The one really defining characteristic for us is ice. And it looks like that photo didn't come across very well, but that is a very snowy scene. These are freshwater lakes, and so they freeze at different degrees and to different winters. What this does is it shuts down the ferries and boat traffic for 3 to 4 months at a time. And so these places are ice locked, as we say, for much of the winter. And so for us, the isolation has a seasonal influence. And I will point out, though, as you all know, necessity is the mother of invention, as they say, and several of our island communities have found some workarounds. A few of them create ice roads in the winter for snowmobiles and automobiles, and at least one has developed a pretty innovative wind sled option. Here's a variety of photos showing the Great Lakes Islands. Our populations range from a low of 89 people year-round to a high of 1,300. Most of the islands in the Great Lakes maintain some level of focus on tourism, although to different degrees. They all have seasonal homes and cottages, and so someone mentioned earlier about the influx of seasonal influx of people. We swell in the summer times, and they are also very important environmental areas. Many of our best remaining habitats and havens for rare species are found on our islands. So All is not rosy, however. Many of the same, not surprising, challenges that you heard earlier from the other speakers are reflected in the Great Lakes Islands. Adequate protection of environmental, cultural, and historic resources, supporting the needs of our schools, providing adequate health care and affordable housing. We have challenges, some of the communities keeping up with broadband and cellular technology. And then another kind of category of challenges, we'll say, many of our communities have very limited local capacity. And by that I mean staff and time and money. And so when there's grant opportunities, they just don't even have the ability or the wherewithal to apply for those grants. Further, there's really poor awareness of living on islands from the mainland perspective. And so a lot of the decision makers and government and so on are on the mainland, and a lot of these communities are out of sight, out of mind. So in 2017, we had the first gathering of Great Lakes Island leaders, and those are a couple of the photos that you see here. We weren't even sure if anyone would show up, and lo and behold, we had about 70 people make the trek to Beaver Island in Lake Michigan, which is a 2-hour ferry. And so that was about 70 people from 13 communities. And it was really exciting to see. I'm actually, I should have said, not an islander myself. I'm a mainlander. So as an observer, it was really exciting to see the participants for the first time coming together and recognizing that while they have some very distinct challenges and they're very distinct from one another, they have a lot in common and would really benefit from sharing those solutions. So that the first meeting created a real sense of camaraderie and a new sense of community among these islands. So unfortunately, leaving that event, there was no structure in place to allow that to continue. So today, the GLIA, Great Lakes Islands Alliance, helps fill that gap. We're consider ourselves only in our second year of growth. The concept has been around, as Suzanne said earlier, maybe 4 or 5 years, but the GLIA itself has been around for about 2. And frankly, the Island Institute and the Maine Islands Coalition that Roger discussed to lead off were our inspiration. So in 2018, the GLIA adopted a group charter, and so we have a common mission, as well as goals and roles and responsibilities and an organizational structure, that kind of stuff. But it's important to note that GLIA is not a standalone organization with full-time staff and budget. We're a collaborative network, and so everybody in a network setting plays a different complementary role. So in terms of our members, the members are the islanders themselves. There's currently about 100, and they come from, again, 14 different communities in the U.S. and in Canada. It is led by a 5-member all-islander steering committee, although we do rely on 3 mainland entities, including my employer, which is the state of Michigan, for administrative, facilitative, and advisory support. And then in terms of communications, I think someone else mentioned this earlier, the distance is a factor for us, and so we do a lot by email. We have a monthly conference call. There's an annual face-to-face meeting now. The 3rd annual event will be coming up in a few weeks. And then we're starting to dabble in some online tools like Slack. So finally, a couple of the lessons learned from our standpoint. Networks do confuse people. So we have a logo and we have a website. And occasionally I'm asked the question, well, where do we mail stuff to? Where are you located? Where's your building? They assume we're a traditional organization. We're not. We're a network. Progress is slow and incremental. So in a voluntary network, things don't go lightning fast. People are participating voluntarily. You don't see huge wins overnight. Sometimes you do go after the low-hanging fruit. The backbone organization I mentioned a little earlier. Most of our members, again, are islanders, and I think like probably islanders all around the world. They have many different roles in their communities. They wear 5 different hats, as we say. And so we have a few partner organizations that are there to keep the lights on, to maintain the list, to facilitate the meetings, that kind of stuff. Power in numbers is important for us. Cumulatively, when you bring those 14 communities together, there's about 20,000 people. So that small island that had 89 people suddenly is part of a larger collective, and that's exciting for them. we really value diversity and inclusivity. Membership in in the GLIA is open to everybody. One of the islands actually has a bridge, and that was one of the early topics. And they said, we are still experiencing islandness. And so just because we have a small bridge should not exclude us. And so they're part of that. We also don't define what it means to be an island leader. Yes, there are elected officials within the group, but you can be an island leader in many different ways. And finally, again, the technology is important when connecting distant people, but it doesn't replace that personal kinship and that face-to-face value. And so we do place significant effort into maintaining an annual meeting where people do come together. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Childers, who is the chair of our steering committee.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, James. I am an islander coming from Madeline Island, which is in Lake Superior, part of the state of Wisconsin here in North America. And I just want to emphasize how thoughtful I thought Alex's comments were. One of the most important parts of our participation in GLIA up to this point has been the recognition that we are not alone. Madeline Island is a fairly small island with about 250 people, but affiliating with the other islands in the GLIA Association, supported by Suzanne and the Island Institute's work, has helped us understand that when we can get together and share experience and learn from each other, we amplify our voice. And as we look forward to where we go from here, as Matt mentioned, we'll be gathering together here soon on Mackinac Island for our 3rd annual summit. And as part of that summit, we'll be making progress, thanks in part to a grant that we've recently received from the Mott Foundation to look at what our institutional structure should be as we organize, and then perhaps more importantly, put together a plan to identify our relationships with the community at large, with opinion leaders, and with elected officials, so that we can amplify our voice around environmental concerns and how they impact our lives here on the Great Lakes Islands. Additionally, we want to strategically connect with networks and organizations in other parts of the globe. This summit is an example of that opportunity, so that we can hear from other places solutions that they've brought to bear in areas like energy and self-sufficiency and healthcare and housing, all of the issues that islands are so familiar with. So I don't want to ramble on. I think we want to save some time for questions and answers at the end of the session. But I just wanted to say thank you from GLIA for inviting us to participate. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael and Matt. That was great. There's some really wonderful observations. I think everybody's really hitting the nail on the head. And I think even just within this webinar, realizing how much we have in common across our geographies is always just such a powerful feeling. So thanks for sharing those reflections. I know we're learning a lot from your communities. I know we're developing an entry in our new What Works library around ferry ownership models that a lot of the islands in the Great Lakes have informed, and even just little issues. How are people regulating golf cart usage on some of the islands? There's the little and the big. I think the goal, as I said at the outset, is we don't have a lot of time in our days in small communities. We may not have the technical expertise or firsthand experience in dealing with something, but when we can make a meaningful connection with somebody who knows what it's like to deal with it and knows where you come from, it becomes that much easier to kind of identify the ways to solve these problems and save some time. That's really what I think networks are about, is helping us to solve problems more quickly. And we know as island communities, there are a lot of challenges these days. So we're grateful that we can be learning from the Great Lakes. And thank you for all the work you're doing to organize the community so we can help that information transfer go more quickly. I want to move over to our last presentation before we move to questions. Before we do that, please use the chat box. There's an actual question and answer function that allows us to work through the questions a little bit more in a little bit more of a methodical manner, if you can use that function. And then we'll scroll through the chat box itself as well if you have questions. But to bring us home, we're gonna go over to Mark in Honolulu to talk about some of the great networking efforts in Hawaii and beyond Hawaii as well that he has been a part of. So take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Suzanne. And it's just been a great opportunity to speak on behalf of Hawaii's um, Clean Energy Initiative in this inaugural virtual island summit. I'm Mark Blick. I'm with the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute. We were founded in 1974 and established in statute to address critical state energy needs. We are a research unit of our School of Ocean, Earth Science and Technology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and we test and evaluate novel renewable energy technologies, and we try to leverage our in-house work with public-private partnerships to integrate emerging technologies into energy transitions in Hawaii and beyond. Before that, I spent 5 years, I was very privileged to be the Hawaii State Energy Administrator and was intimately involved in the transition we'll be talking about today. We view, and with our focus on island networks for resiliency, I wanted to talk about what I think that is the most exciting and impactful part of our Clean Energy Initiative and our unambiguous drive for energy self-sufficiency and self-reliance, and how to best sustain that and replicate it, such an ambitious agenda. First, I'd like to kind of take a high-level view and talk about how we view Hawaii's energy transition as a multi-level and purposive, policy-driven sustainability and self-sufficiency socio-technical intervention. And it really needs to have 4 key components to really make an energy transition. You have to have renewable resources, you have to have smart and advanced modern grids, energy storage systems to be able to balance these grids as you add more intermittent power into the systems. But most importantly, you have to have binding commitments with effective governance and oversight, really crucial elements. On the next slide, you can see that when you step back, we look at this island energy transition. I think any island energy transition really takes place at 3 distinct levels of engagement: landscape, regime, and niche. And you know, the landscape, and when we use this multi-level perspective to kind of explain what we're doing in energy transitions, we try to look at the long-term transition activities and these activities at these 3 distinct levels. At the macro level, you know, this landscape level, it focuses on the broader environment and trends that influence all of these socio-technical regimes occurring at this meso level. This regime level, that's where these scientists and policymakers at sort of major governmental levels, at a national level, for example, or even at a state level, are taking actions to move this along. But the niche level refers to the smaller but important locus of innovation that helps realize these transitions at the regime and at the landscape level. Niches at the micro level are where the action takes place and where the various experiments, including the co-evolution of technology, user practices, and regulatory structures take place. And really this whole stakeholder alliance, that's where it's rooted. Even though you have stakeholders at the landscape and the regime level, it's really rooted there. So getting back to, on the next slide, how this all comes together in policies and actions, and ultimately in stakeholders. You'll see at the top of this, I describe at the regime level, there was initially a major agreement between the Department of Energy and Hawaii. We call it the Energy Agreement, and that really pushed the goals. This essentially were the goals that we set, non-binding agreements to generate 40% of our electricity from renewable resources by 2030 and reduce end-use electricity consumption by 30%. But on top of those goals, we had a stakeholder alliance to try to keep it all together, to try to create a sense of purpose, and to basically, if you're going to work towards binding agreements, you have to have agreement on what you're trying to do and how you're going about doing that. And then of course at the niche level, we then took the broad goals and applied them to the utilities and to other key players that would actually have to carry this out, and agreeing to participate in this stakeholder alliance, which they did. And so all this began in 2008, and you can see in the first block that we had these niche level actions to remove impediments through law for siting solar PV on rooftops. And then we created funds at the regime level to help support the whole initiative. But then in the next year, in 2009, we took those goals and turned them into binding commitments when the Hawaii legislature adopted that 40% objective in Act 155, a regime level action. But then we also enacted new home solar water heater mandates for new homes. So at the niche level, you would have all this essentially support of mutually supporting activities. So this is how we got this kicked off. And in the next slide, you can see our big challenge is really affecting change on 6 isolated grids. So none of these islands that you see are interconnected in any way. We can't support our intermittent energy installations through support from the other islands through their thermal generation units. It all has to come individually in each of those islands, and they're sort of independent. And if you look at the second or third island from the left, Oahu, you can see that has our greatest energy demand, 1,200 megawatts at typical operation. And we have to find resources on Oahu to be able to carry out what we're doing. 70% of all of our energy use is in Oahu. And so the resource and population, unfortunately, are not co-located. So that sets a number of hurdles. And so meeting our renewable portfolio goals requires a lot of innovation and community commitment. What did happen was we did such a good job of moving it forward, though, again, supported by stakeholders that were basically creating, I guess, the glue, essentially, to ensure that it was not acceptable for the utilities to not move forward and for us not to have a collaborative effort to site this generation that we needed and to make the investments in the utility grid and to buy storage. All these components of an energy transition, all of those things were again supported by this mutual agreement of these stakeholders. We were able then in 2015 to move our agenda forward. We found that we had an interim goal of reaching 15% by 2015. By 2015, we had exceeded that goal by 8%. We had had 23% renewable energy. So the legislature felt confident enough, with strong support from the stakeholder group, to move up basically remove ambiguity. What is our total value of where we wanted to be in the future? Total self-reliance, energy self-reliance. And we became the first nation, first state in the nation to pass 100% renewable portfolio standard. That target's set for 2045. We still need to achieve a 30% target by 2020, and we picked up we actually increased the target to 30% in 2020, and by 2040, we intend to have 70% renewable energy in the state. To really move this forward, on the next slide, you'll see that there has to be very firm governance and the stakeholder alliance. And by governance, I mean this institutional support and oversight. But it also means that provides confidence to these stakeholders and the investors that you actually have a program that's going to be there and will continue to move forward. So as we pursue these energy policies and rules and regulations governing this transition, we feel strongly that the stakeholders need to be involved in setting the goals, basically determining the norms, ideas, and goals to be incorporated. And then once those principles are firmly in mind, the governing entities can set forth agreements and the subsequent work plans and the focus of planning and research and design. And then you have to have the public-private partnerships. We determined just to get to the 40% goal, we did analysis that showed it would take $16 to $20 billion. So you're going to have critical investments. On the next slide, I just talked a little bit about the structure of this stakeholder alliance and the executive team to kind of coordinate it. And that was really done at the executive branch level of state government. But again, the whole idea is to link these functions that are occurring at the regime level and at the niche level and the different players, have them working together. Because if they're at cross goals, then you get stuck as you're trying to make progress. And we also view it to being complementary to the other regulatory and oversight functions that are set by law with the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission. And we coordinated all this activity through advisory boards and working group chairs. Working groups were set forth to try to identify the biggest issues, unfinished business that we needed to resolve. On the next slide, I'd just like to quickly say that you really need firm analysis, data transparency to be able to make good decisions. And so the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, as a state organization, had the trust of the critical players and most importantly, the regulators. And the analyses that we do is often cited in utility commission decisions and recommendations. So all of that needs to be done, and I think it's an important element. I'd like to conclude by saying, though, you know, it was wonderful to be able to bring together this kind of work in Hawaii, but obviously this whole network and this island alliances and that we see through this virtual summit shows that it's just a burgeoning effort that's happening.
I think we got so close with the technology and it may have just run out. Our luck may have just run out. Mark, Mark, I don't know if you can hear us. We're so close. Well, if Mark joins us again, we'll let him finish. Oh, Mark, can you hear me, Mark?
Yes.
Sorry, you froze. Why don't you finish up?
Okay. So that essentially, we want to continue also to support these alliances and these efforts and these transition efforts through comprehensive multidisciplinary research and design and demonstration, and then disseminate these key findings. I think if we do that and we work together, there's no doubt that there's no level of transition that we can't help make real and happen sooner than later. And look forward to dealing with any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for James. That's always the trick, is stop the video when you have the bandwidth issues. That happens on islands often. Thanks, Mark. I want to say that all of the work in Hawaii, it's so apparent. It's been so inspirational for those of us trying to organize and catch up on climate and clean energy related initiatives. And it's so apparent that it's because of years and years of hard work and organizing and networking within the state and beyond that it's allowed you to get to such an exciting point. I know for many years, the Verge conference really helped me to understand all of the cross-sector work and coordination that needs to go into a dream like that. And excited to say that Maine finally, in the last week or two, created a carbon neutral goal by 2045. And we're really looking around to other states, including Hawaii, to understand how that networking and coordination can happen to reach such ambitious goals. So thanks, Mark, for that contribution. As you can see, the concept of networks has relevance when it comes to particular geographies, when it comes to particular technologies or sectors. But what we know is we can save time and find peers and support through our network initiatives. So it looks like folks have been pretty good about answering a lot of the questions. So if you go over to the Q&A, hopefully you can see the answered tab and be able to see the responses that we've put into the questions already. But I guess we'll actually start off with a question for you, Mark, that's in the Q&A box. It says, when it comes to data sharing, have you ever experienced anything in regards to data as property and that some businesses do not want to publish or share their data? And then maybe we'll start with Mark and then go to Stephanie on that front.
Yes, I mean, that's a very real issue. You know, I think one of the ways that we've worked to overcome that is to kind of build aggregate data dumps, you know, places where the utilities can publish, for example, its circuit level, you know, what we call hosting capacity, how much PV room is left in a particular circuit. At first, they were somewhat resistant to that, but then they opened up to it when they realized that this really wasn't going to violate, you know, any sort of proprietary right of the customers and so on. And, you know, we also have the emergency function of dealing with natural disasters and so on. And when we have sometimes reservations about sharing inventories and so on. And what happened is the stakeholder alliance helped build trust that we're only going to use this information for those specific purposes, public purposes, and that helped erode it. But I think there's still some of that reticence there.
Thanks. Stephanie?
We've had a little bit of trouble with collecting data, but we've had a bigger issue with just sharing data. Our bigger issue is with collecting data because we have sometimes limited internet capacity in the communities, and then trying to set up a system in the community, you have to have the human capacity of somebody who's going to maintain it. So our bigger issue has been dealing with being able to collect good data from the utility operations, and that's something that we've been working on here to try to increase, because that's incredibly important to figuring out how to optimize the systems and showing how they're performing.
Great. There had been a couple of questions asked about working through the different legal structures when you're working with different countries, and Alexis put a good answer in there. I guess I wanted to ask Matt and Michael maybe to chime in on that question, working between two countries, to hear your perspectives.
Well, I'll chime in quickly. That's an issue that we recognize and that we have to try to resolve. As part of the grant that we've recently received, we're going to focus on what structural opportunities exist to make sure that we're working both in the Canadian frame and then the frame here in the United States. So we don't have a complete answer to that yet, but we're hopeful that we'll get to one.
And if I could add, so yeah, to slice a little further, we have the two nations, but in the U.S., the islands are in 3 states, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin. And then the analogous in Canada is the province of Ontario. So you've got multiple local levels of government, you've got state and provincial, and then you've got 2 federal levels. And, you know, our network, we're trying to dissolve those borders, those imaginary borders, so to speak, and talk to islands regardless of where they are. But the reality of it is when you identify solutions, often they do happen locally, and then that, you know, interfaces with the local level of government. So as Michael said, we're still trying to, as a network, figure out how to do that in all of these places, and would love to hear what others do.
Great. Maybe I'll go actually over to Mark and see if he wants to share any perspectives on that. I know that because of Hawaii's location, that there are a lot of partnerships within the Pacific. And then after Mark, we can see if Alexis wants to add anything to his answer. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think part of it is making sure that we team with the folks that are most active in the region. And there have been so many players at the East-West Center, and certainly, surprisingly, the Office of Naval Research has been stimulating partnerships throughout the region just to strengthen many of the island communities. And of course, it's wherever bases exist, like in Guam and other places. So we've been able to forge relationships through that. We also had some international agreements because we're the most isolated landmass on Earth, populated landmass on Earth. So we end up working very closely with Japan and Korea, and those partnerships also are extremely important, and we learned very much and able to share a lot of information.
Thanks. Alexis, do you want to share any other comments around working across different political structures? Oh, we just need you to unmute yourself.
Sure. Okay, thanks. No, I just could add the experience that there was, I realized, I'm sorry about that, I realized there was a missing slide in my presentation. So I could add something about the experience of cooperation from communities around the globe. And that's how we first cooperated with Suzanne as well, because I work at the Samsung Energy Academy in Denmark, and then we had a very interesting project with the Island Institute in Maine and Molokai in Hawaii, and then communities in Japan and also in Victoria, Australia. So, and the time differences also were 12 hours often. So we found there was also a question about how if we have used elaborated tools, and I answered no. But it's clear that it's often very useful to have the opportunity at some point to meet in person. And this is also can create a better understanding and trust among people. So we were lucky to have this opportunity. And then of course tools that can help you. We have like video conferences, because it's very important also to put a face on a name, as they say. But no, other than that, I don't think there's something more elaborated than this. And often there is the risk to focus on the tools and not on the why a network or an organization does that. So if there is a clear reason and a purpose, then the tools can be simple and effective enough.
Great, awesome. I just, a couple more questions to go here. I just wanted to also acknowledge some of the great partners that are on here. I have a question from Lila Bishrad, a longtime supporter and trustee of the Island Institute. I know David Thomas is a trustee of the Island Institute on here. We've got John Allen, who I know was a great partner to Matt and Michael in starting the Great Lakes Islands Alliance, Bill Vino, Bill Penn, I think Lauren Sinatra from Nantucket. It's just great to be able to share this story with so many of you, and to know that there are so many others on the line that hopefully we'll be able to connect with afterwards. So we've got a question in the question and answer around red tide, and I wondered if folks have an answer to that. They might just answer that in writing. But I do want to ask the question that Lila was just asking. I know she's got a perspective, an international perspective, around working with the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And I have to say that it was really my exposure to working with folks in Europe and with the Samsung Energy Academy that really made me become much more aware of it. I don't think we see them often enough in this country. But Mark, you just chimed in on this, but Alexis, I know you're doing a lot on this front. Who would like to share about their experience of working on the SDGs? And I guess Lila's specific question was which ones and how did it work out? Alexis, could I ask you as somebody who I know has experience in doing this? Just remember to take yourself off of mute.
Yep.
Thanks.
So I can't see the question anymore.
It went under answered at the bottom of answered, but it says,
Oh,
have you had experience working with the
right.
UN
Okay.
organizations on the SDGs? If so, which one? I guess the question is which one, an organization or a goal. I'm not sure, but I think you've probably done both.
Yes. Well, we have worked with the concepts are related to a just transition and the involvement of the local level and the communities, because that was also the strong point of the NGO I work for, where on a small islands of 4,000 people, the energy transition happened from 100% fossil fuels, 100% renewables in 10 years with the engagement of the population and of all the stakeholders. So it was a local decision, an island's decision to go to 100% renewables. And that was the only reason why it was possible, because everybody agreed and then everybody could see what's there for them. So this is the main message that we try to also disseminate. And specifically with specific organizations from the UN, no, but we are currently in a negotiation with the UN in order to be recognized as a carbon neutral community, SAMSU. So that would be very good. Maybe some other speaker has more something to add on this from a different angle, maybe. And then if I think of something else, I'll just jump in again.
Great. Anyone else on SDGs? Is that something we could bring into do a better job of bringing into our island networks here in the US, I think. I just I had to say hello to Camille from the Scottish Islands Federation, and the Isle of Egg is also here. I would encourage anybody working on islands to check out the work in Scotland on the Islands Act and the Island Plan. I've been able to learn a lot about it from her and others. It's a great way to understand the policy implications to islands, and I think a great model for all of us that we're following very closely here in Maine. I think next time we do one of these, I would love to have Camille on the lineup as well, and we'll have to take a couple of panels, but it's great to have her on the line as well. I think we'll wrap because I'm not seeing really any other new questions. I want to thank everybody for their participation. James, what an excellent idea. Thanks for making the space for us to be with all of you. And thanks to these panelists and their great work. I hope that you can keep in touch, find us on LinkedIn, find our websites, come and see us on the beautiful coast of Maine, and take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thanks.